The Australian Grand Prix, perhaps we judged it too harshly. It provided some good battles, plenty of overtakes and drama. However, the racing does look very gamey and all the drivers are still complaining. So there's some work to do for the FIA. But let's get into the analysis of the Grand Prix. The pace distribution shows that Mercedes and Ferrari seem to be in a league of their own as of the first race, with the Red Bull and McLaren not lagging too far behind, with half a second separating them. In the new regulations phase, that gap is not insurmountable. When upgrades and developments come around throughout the season and different tracks favoring different cars, this gap is very subject to change. At this stage, none of the top four teams can be fully ruled out of the championship yet. From Bortoletto's Audi downward till Colapinto's Alpine is where the midfield begins and the gap is very large to the top four teams. We can see many of the cars here all seemed able to race with one another. We saw a few laps between Lundblad and Behrman racing each other, as well as Gasly and Ocon who had a battle for a while. Aston Martin and Cadillac are the firm back markers well off the pace between 3.2 to 4.2 seconds on average slower than the leader. They have a lot to cover if they wish to become more competitive. Aston Martin almost ran a test session with the amount of times they pulled out of the race and came back in. Cadillac in their first race, obviously a lot of learning to be done from them. If we look more closely at the leaders, a lot seems to be happening between Antonelli, Hamilton, Russell and Leclerc. Very close gaps between the Mercedes and Ferrari boys. You might be wondering, why does Antonelli have the fastest pace when he finished second? It's a measurement of pace throughout the race. So George Russell had a gap. Since he was leading the race, this allowed him to stay ahead and manage his tyres more. This comes with a few benefits and ensures that he could save more tyres, and if needed, if challenged at a later point, he would have more tyres to work with against whichever competitor he would have to race. Whereas Antonelli, after his bad race start, had many positions to gain and thereafter had to close down the gap to the race leaders, and all round would have had to have pushed much harder than what George did in order to make up positions and re-establish himself in amongst the front runners. On paper, Antonelli was the quicker driver from the Mercedes pair. It's also interesting to note that Lewis Hamilton had better pace than his teammate Charles Leclerc. On track, it did look like Lewis was the more comfortable of the two Ferrari drivers. Charles Leclerc did mention in a post-race interview that he was not happy with the setup of his car coming into the race. So it may be fine to say that Charles had more potential in the car had his setup been more optimized. This is very encouraging data for Ferrari, as it shows that Mercedes did not blow away the competition as what was expected after that massive qualifying gap between Mercedes and the rest of the pack in qualifying. However, even while saying this, we should keep in mind that there were differing strategies between these drivers, with Ferrari pitting at a later point than Mercedes. This would mean in turn that Mercedes had to have run longer on their hard stint compared to Ferrari. Obviously, the longer your tyres are on for, the more susceptible you are to tyre degradation, which slows down overall pace. So, looking at that, the Mercedes may have, at the moment, more innate pace car for car than Ferrari does. The true gap probably sits around 2 to 3 tenths in Mercedes' favour. However, Ferrari is not far behind, and the fight is definitely on between these two teams. As we go track by track, we could see a bit of to and fro between Ferrari and Mercedes in terms of who has the better car on the day. Now let's talk a bit about the Red Bull and McLaren and where they seem to be. They are a noticeable gap behind. Not a gap that is insurmountable, but definitely noticeable, with Max being half a second behind and Lando being 0.523 seconds behind. Max did start far down the grid and, just by the way, did a fantastic effort coming all the way up to P6, but this obviously does mean that it would have hampered him in the race pace-wise while trying to get through the traffic, whereas Norris had less traffic to deal with. However, if you look at the tyres, both Verstappen and Norris used an extra set compared to Ferrari and Mercedes. By using that extra stop, it means that their pace would have been better due to having fresher tyres, more grip, and that more grip means more ability to get faster times out of your car. The issue that comes with this is, even while having a significant tyre delta against Ferrari and Mercedes, they find themselves about half a second off. Especially for McLaren, Lando had not that much traffic to deal with, yet he had to do an extra stop and his pace was still nowhere near to that of Ferrari and Mercedes. This clearly means that they are placed currently as the fourth best team. Here is a breakdown of how each team is currently doing and where they're ranked after Australia. What we could see as we go race by race for the upcoming weekends is battles between Mercedes, Ferrari, and possibly Red Bull. McLaren looks just a step behind at the moment, and in a no man's land as the fourth best team for now. Audi, Haas, and Racing Bulls seems to be the next tier, which would be able to grab the lower half of the points. Alpine and Williams are very similar in pace, and at the bottom we have Aston Martin and Cadillac, who are both struggling. The Australian track was a good measurement for the fans to see where cars are, because the way the track is styled inspires degradation, as many drivers complained about, along with various corners and straights. This is just the nature of the track. Let's take a look at the fastest laps. On the top is Verstappen, and this was done quite early on the second lap of his second hard tyre stint, which was lap 43. Being that far into a 58 lap race, when the cars are lighter and on such fresh tyres, it's not surprising that the gap between him and the next fastest time is almost 4/10. Thinking along the same lines, even Lando's time in the second position is also very competitive, but it shows that both the Red Bull and McLaren struggle in terms of tyre degradation. You may be surprised to see no appearance by George Russell, but once again he was in the lead, and this did allow him to regulate his pace accordingly. Mercedes does have the ability to push their engine harder and get better times, but it does mean that later on, due to more engine strain, reliability will have to take a knock. Not too much to take out of this, but it shows once again that Ferraris and Mercedes, despite not even setting the fastest times, were able to win the race by such a gap, and it is testament to them being ahead at this moment. Here is an overview of where every team is placed and at the moment where the battles lie for now. Mercedes and Ferrari with a minimal gap between them that's subject to change race by race. Red Bull and McLaren, with Red Bull seemingly a bit ahead considering Verstappen having a much more difficult task than Lando and was still able to catch up to him. Red Bull is a bit of an unknown still. They could be a bit closer to Mercedes and Ferrari. We'll have to wait and see how they go around China. In the B tier are the current leaders of the midfield, who are all able to score points. They are all quite evenly matched pace-wise. All seem capable to score those lower points positions. The C tier is Alpine and Williams, who are behind the midfield leaders. They're not miles off the midfield, but it would take a significant car development for them to catch up. In these opening rounds, unless we get some wacky races, we shouldn't expect to see Alpine and Williams drivers scoring points. Finally, Aston Martin and Cadillac in the lowest tier, they very clearly are the backmarkers. Aston Martin's car is not working. It's unable to even finish a race properly at this moment. And the newbies Cadillac have a lot to learn and much catching up to do. Thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you guys in China.